So this is where there has been a slight change to our program. Unfortunately, Dr. Lee had something come up unexpectedly. So you all get me for the next section again. Hi. So it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Patrick Ryan, who is our keynote speaker as we move into the Envisioning of OHDSI Global and EU. Dr. Ryan is the Vice President of Observational Health Data Analytics at Janssen Research and Development. He is one of the leaders, and as we just learned, it's not just pushing, it's pulling forward as we look at the real world implementations of medical devices and how they may impact individual clients and patients. And he does this, for example, one of his many hats is as a PI for a public-private partnership facilitated by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. So please welcome to the stage Dr. Patrick Ryan as he makes our keynote address.
Thank you, Whitney. And I want to thank, I'm very honored to be here. I want to thank TMU and Jason and the entire team for hosting us here at OHDSI APAC Symposium. It's really wonderful to be able to be here in person and celebrate with all of you what we can accomplish together as a community. I'm going to presume that this is going to be my slides. There we go. So you heard from George about what we have collectively accomplished as a community to establish the world's largest observational data network, to publish a lot of papers in high-impact journals, and to generate evidence that we hope will continue to be impactful. What I'd like to do is really focus on that last part about how do we actually generate reliable evidence. Many of you in the room are somewhere along the journey of your professional careers in conducting research that we hope will be useful. And what I would like to hopefully address in the next 20 minutes is how I think we all together can collaborate to transform health by generating reliable evidence from observational data that can directly impact the lives of those that we love everywhere around the world. I'm going to start this, though, by expressing what I believe is the fundamental challenge that we all face as researchers who want to do observational research and want our work to be considered reliable and trustworthy. The current status quo of how we conduct observational research is pretty challenging to build trust. Studies oftentimes start by writing a protocol, although that seems to be an optional step for many folks, whereby there may be, hopefully I can advance my slides, where sometimes there may be some sort of review of a protocol. There's going to be a little lag here, I think. There we go. We're going to build all that all the way up. But once a protocol is developed, we curate the data that we are going to use. We identify the cohorts or the set of patients that we want to study. We conduct statistical analyses, and we disseminate evidence, oftentimes through writing peer-reviewed publications. The problem with this process is that it's only at the end of the day. We're going to have more of a delay. There we go. The problem is that at the end of the day, once we publish our paper, that's when people ask the question, is the evidence reliable? And at that stage, there's lots of reasons one could doubt that the evidence is reliable, because that becomes the moment when you ask the question, did they use the appropriate methods against the data? Did they have phenotypes that had appropriate measurement error? Did they assess data quality? There are also technical concerns associated with this. How did they conduct the statistical programming? Was the logic that they applied to identify their cohorts correct? How did they standardize their data? And all of these questions arise at the time that someone is looking at the evidence and trying to determine whether they should trust it. And we believe that this is a problem because if you are holding the answer to a question, you may be biased into deciding that you like the answer because it conforms to what you expect, or you don't like it because it's contradictory. And you can use any of these as excuses to not trust evidence. So I'm specifically going to ask you all to participate in this conversation, and I want you to start by imagining the following situation. Imagine you or a loved one, maybe it's your mother, maybe it's your partner, maybe it's your best friend. Imagine that they were diagnosed with a disease, and they were offered two alternative treatments, treatment A and treatment B. Now, both treatments are expected to reduce the serious complications that are due to the disease, but they also may have some small risk of some serious adverse effects. There have not yet been any randomized clinical trials that directly compare the two treatments. So how are you going to make a choice for yourself or your loved one? You have three options as far as I can see. Option number one is to wait to make your treatment choice until somebody conducts a direct head-to-head clinical trial. Another two is that you could rely on expert opinion or indirect comparisons between randomized clinical trials, albeit that in that situation, there is inconclusive evidence about the comparative benefits and risks that are currently available. Or you could try to learn from real-world evidence, compare that with the existing knowledge, and then make your treatment decision. Now, I want a show of hands in the room. How many of you, if faced in this situation, would just wait until the clinical trial is conducted? Show of hands. Nobody wants to wait, okay? How many of you would rely on expert opinion and the existing evidence from randomized trials? Raise your hand. Okay, so maybe about half of you in the room are saying that you may rely on expert opinion. And how many of you would like to learn from real-world evidence and compare that with existing knowledge and then make your decision? Okay, more of you. Okay. So I want you to think about this question, specifically about what this means for you and your loved one as we go through the rest of this presentation. Now, imagine in this situation, continuing with this example, imagine I now tell you that real-world evidence exists, that somebody has conducted an observational database study using a comparative new user cohort design and statistical methods to estimate the risk comparing treatment A versus treatment B. And in this observational study, they found that the benefits associated with A were better than treatment B, with some sort of estimate of a relative risk, saying that treatment A has a relative risk of 1.3, but that the risks associated with treatment B also have a significant effect with a threefold increased risk. So now a single observational database study has been published with this new information that's been provided to the otherwise inconclusive randomized trials. Show of hands of how many of you now feel confident in making a treatment decision for you or your loved one. Raise your hand. A few hands are seeing that we have clear evidence that we have evidence that a treatment has better benefits and better risks associated with that, but a few of hands are saying you're confident in making that decision. Now, what if I were to give you some extra information? The next slide. What if I were to tell you that this study of the single database that provided this evidence was accompanied by a wide range of supporting diagnostics, that we could learn that this study was conducted across over 160,000 patients, that the treatment comparison was quite similar, that we can detect that there is no residual bias, and so therefore we believe that this study may be reliable. How many of you now would be confident in making a treatment choice about choosing treatment A versus B? A few more hands, but most of you are still not raising your hand. Okay, and the next slide. What if I were to tell you that this was not just a single database study, but we had conducted a global network study using data across North America and Europe and Asia, showing a consistent effect across, in this case, 7 databases, showing an effect that demonstrates that treatment A has a better benefit, and showing that it decreases the risk consistently across all of these databases. How many of you now, in the face of this evidence across a network of databases, would now be confident in making a treatment choice? Show of hands. Okay, now most of the hands in the room are up. Okay, well, this situation is not really a hypothetical, nor are these things that I'm listed here made up numbers. These are real results from real OHDSI network studies for real decisions that are infecting real patients every single day. George showed this slide in his presentation, and I'm going to take a second to go through this more. We've been thinking a lot in the OHDSI community about what does it mean to produce reliable evidence. Evidence that you can trust. Evidence that you believe could help you or a loved one make important treatment choices. And we believe that it is not sufficient for people to conduct an observational study and produce a single estimate, because that does not demonstrate that that research is repeatable or reproducible. It doesn't demonstrate that the work is replicable. It doesn't prove that the results are generalizable to other populations or that they're robust to treatment choices. And we don't necessarily have confidence that the statistical estimates we produce are calibrated. However, if we can prove that our evidence is reproducible, is generalizable, is robust, and is well calibrated, then we have a chance to produce reliable evidence that can be trusted to make important decisions in the lives of patients such as yourselves and your loved ones. So George highlighted this slide that we presented at the OHDSI Global Symposium a couple weeks ago. This is something that we are encouraging our entire community to think carefully about and hopefully contribute to. We believe the future of observational research does not involve individual researchers conducting individual studies of individual databases for individual hypotheses. Rather, we believe that together as a community, we can establish a system that uses a network of data across North America and Europe and the Asia-Pacific regions that applies consistent scientific best practices to identify the appropriate data sources for use, to collaboratively establish phenotypes to represent our exposures and outcomes, and to conduct study diagnostics that prove that our evidence is indeed reliable. And together, by building this system, we can generate the evidence that could directly impact patient care and clinical guidelines. So I want to take you through in the last few minutes a story about some of the work that we have done in the OHDSI community and why I feel so passionately about the opportunity in front of us together as a community. Back in October of 2018, Martijn and Mark and I presented the initial LEGEND hypertension results. So that is now 4 years ago, just around now. And when we introduced this idea that together we could establish scientific best practices that could be consistently applied across a global network of databases, we argued that this evidence we could generate would be, for the first time, something that could be provably reliable and go well beyond the traditional way that real-world evidence is generated. In that presentation, I showed the clinical guideline from the American College of Cardiology from 2017, whose lead author here is Paul Welton. And this clinical guideline offers up what is the current state of knowledge for when making treatment choices about hypertension. And in that guideline, it highlighted the evidence that's available with the predominant belief that randomized clinical trials are the necessary evidence for making clinical guideline choices. And on the basis of that, made recommendations for what treatments should be recommended based on either that a randomized clinical trial existed or expert opinion. without consideration of real-world evidence to support these decisions. And at the very top of the first part, they made a recommendation that chlorthalidone is preferred on the basis of its prolonged half-life and proven trial reduction of cardiovascular disease in comparison to hydrochlorothiazide. So these are two different diuretic treatments that did not have any head-to-head clinical trials, but on the basis of expert opinion and a physiologic hypothesis, it had been advised that chlorthalidone might be the recommended treatment to consider if you were going to use a diuretic treatment. And amongst the many things that we looked at, we considered how would one want to answer the question whether chlorthalidone is a better or worse treatment than hydrochlorothiazide. And we could imagine designing a theoretical randomized clinical trial, like the target trial we would aspire to, such that we could compare the effectiveness and safety of these two treatments. And once we laid out this target trial, by applying our legend principles, we were able to implement this study in a consistent fashion to generate real-world evidence. But in 2018, when we presented this, it turns out that there was a clinical trial that had been initiated called the Diuretic Comparison Project. Hopefully that'll pop up, whereby they had started a clinical trial in 2016, and they had estimated that it would be completed in October of 2022, which raises the question, back in 2018, we asked this question, what can we learn now from observational data while we wait 4 years for the randomized clinical trial to be completed? And we could have just waited till now, 1 month ago, and done nothing. But instead, what we did was we conducted an observational study to estimate the comparative effectiveness of these treatments. And in fact, Mark presented at this very meeting to predict what was going to happen to this clinical trial 4 years before the results read out. Now, we published these findings in JAMA Internal Medicine in 2020. This is now 2.5 years ago. George Ripsack was the lead author, but Chan and Nicole, and as members of the APAC community, joined colleagues in Europe and the US to collaboratively investigate this question and to produce evidence. But it was not just a normal single database study of a single hypothesis to give an answer. Rather, what we presented in this paper was a systematic evaluation of the comparative effectiveness of chlorthalidone versus hydrochlorothiazide. We looked across a range of different cardiovascular outcomes, such as acute myocardial infarction, heart failure, and stroke. And for all of these outcomes, we observed no difference. That is to say, we did not believe that chlorthalidone had a decreased risk of cardiovascular events relative to hydrochlorothiazide, even though the guideline suggested that it was preferred. We went further and actually summarized a large collection of potential side effects. And what we observed is while there was no difference in cardiovascular events, there was a substantial increased risk in hypokalemia. So therefore, if given the choice between two treatments that are equally effective, but one treatment has an increased risk, we would be concerned about how to make that choice. We didn't just provide estimates, though. We provided diagnostics that told us that we believed we had accounted for residual bias. We looked across a range of different databases and showed that we got consistent answers across our data network. And we conducted a robust set of sensitivity analysis to prove that our results were reliable. Now, even though we published this paper, Paul Welton, the same guy who wrote the clinical guidelines, authored a letter in response to our paper. And I'm actually going to take a second to read this. He said, Ripsack et al. Compared cardiovascular and safety outcomes for chlorthalidone and hydrochlorothiazide in the treatment of hypertension. Chlorthalidone is recommended over hydrochlorothiazide because it has a longer duration of effect. Prior meta-analyses and observational studies suggest chlorthalidone is superior. However, to our knowledge, no published randomized trials exist. And he ends by saying, Moderately strong prior evidence suggests the superiority of chlorthalidone over hydrochlorothiazide, and there's a substantial likelihood that residual confounding accounts for their lack of observed difference. For this reason, it's imperative that we await the more definitive VA trial results before changing clinical practice guidelines on diuretic choice. So I gave you all a choice. Do you want to wait for a clinical trial, or do you want to make a decision? And here we had the guidelines committee saying we should just wait until the clinical trial results. This was back in 2020. Well, guess what? We don't have to wait anymore. Last week, the randomized clinical trial was reported. So this is the first time I can share with you what happened to our evidence relative to the clinical trial. At the American College of Cardiology, the diuretic comparison project results, top-level results were released. And their principal findings was that when comparing cardiovascular events, chlorthalidone versus hydrochlorothiazide observed no difference, a hazard ratio of 1 with a confidence interval of 0.9 to 1.16. And their secondary outcome, they observed a statistically significant increased risk of hypokalemia, the same outcome that we warned about in our paper years earlier. So to put the results of the OHDSI LEGEND study side by side with this randomized clinical trial, 4 years earlier, we suggested that there was no difference in cardiovascular events, no difference in myocardial infarction, stroke, and heart failure. However, a substantial increase in the risk of a side effect. The randomized clinical trial 4 years later has confirmed the findings that we observed in our reliable observational evidence. Now, this is not to say that we shouldn't want to conduct randomized clinical trials. Of course, we want these high-quality evidence, but maybe we shouldn't wait for randomized clinical trials before making use of evidence if we can prove that our evidence is reliable. So I go back to this and urge all of you in this community, there is no way we could generate reliable evidence that looks across a global network of databases, that applies scientific best practices to assess robustness, unless we work together as a community. But what we have now demonstrated and now proven and predicted with precision years in advance is that if we work together as a collaborative community, we can generate reliable evidence that can directly impact the lives of millions of patients around the world. And I think that this is an opportunity for all of us to participate in something that is much bigger than what we could accomplish individually, but provides us the basis of contributing to something that can transform healthcare by finally being an opportunity to use real-world evidence in a reliable fashion. Actually, in the interest of time, I'm going to skip this slide and just go to my conclusion. Thoughts? I am really excited to be here at the OHDSI APAC meeting. I believe that what this meeting represents for our region is an opportunity for us to come together and think about how we can collaborate. Building trust in using real-world evidence means that we all need to be thinking differently. It's not about each of us conducting our own individual studies, but it's rather about how we all come together to build a system of evidence. Sitting here in Taiwan, we have, you all have an amazing collection of data resources, whether it be the national claims data, national health insurance research database, or whether we talk about the electronic health record system here at TMU and the supporting hospitals. But each of those databases by themselves, if you go off and conduct your own individual question of those individual databases, you will not generate reliable evidence. Instead, if our colleagues here in Taiwan worked with the rest of the APAC region and the rest of the global region, we can actually bring evidence from around the world to directly impact the lives of patients all around the world. This requires open science and collaboration. It requires us all to contribute, whether your expertise be in data or analytics or in clinical evidence generation. But together as a community, we can actually develop a proactive future where evidence is reliable and trustworthy and directly used to improve the lives of patients around the world. And I'm excited to collaborate with all of you to make this possibility a reality. Thank you very much.
Next, we will hear from Dr. Peter Rijnbeek. He's a chair and the professor in the Department of Medical Informatics at the Emirates Medical University in the Netherlands. He's the head of OHDSI EU and also of DARWIN EU. He is with us virtually today. He sent his remarks in advance. So thank you, Dr. Rijnbeek, for his remarks as well.
DARWIN EU will provide EMA's scientific committees with real-world evidence from healthcare databases across the EU, and it will be central to prepare for and respond to future public health crises such as COVID-19. So what could be more timely? The vision of DARWIN EU is to give EMA and national competent authorities access to valid and trustworthy real-world evidence, for example, on diseases, patient populations, and the use, safe, and effectiveness of medicines, including vaccines, throughout the life cycle of a medicinal product. By supporting decision-making on the development, authorization, and surveillance of medicines, a wide range of stakeholders will benefit, from patients and healthcare professionals to health technology assessment bodies, and of course the pharmaceutical industry. DARWIN EU will act as a pathfinder for the European health data space and will ultimately connect to the European health services, enabling the use of this data in the context of medicines regulation in Europe. EMA will be working with the Erasmus University Medical Centre Rotterdam to establish the DARWIN EU Coordination Centre, and you will hear a lot more about this today, because the Coordination Centre is designed to develop and manage a network of real-world healthcare data across the EU and will be able to conduct scientific studies requested by medicines regulators and at a later stage requested by other stakeholders. The contract was awarded following an open call for tender, and we're delighted to have Erasmus Medical Centre as the contractor because the medical centre is highly experienced in database management, in federated analysis and multi-database studies, as well as being in a position to use a common data model, and which means that this can be readily available to a large number of potential data partners. We will work collaboratively to ensure that DARWIN EU rapidly delivers benefits, and we will pilot regulatory use cases across the life cycle of medicines.
Yeah, yes. You can imagine that we are pretty proud that we got this video. And I must say, this is also a thank you to the whole OHDSI community. I think this is not something that only Erasmus is delivering, but it's something that we could do because we are part of the OHDSI community and all of you have done a great job. And this is, of course, for us really the cherry on the cake to start delivering real-world evidence to the regulator in Europe. So it's very exciting. And it's especially exciting because in Europe we have a lot of challenges that you are all familiar with. Different types of structures of databases, but also the problem of a huge number of terminology systems that we have to deal with in Europe. So I might even say that our approach with OHDSI is even more applicable to the European situation where we have to solve all these problems at a very large scale. We don't speak one language in Europe, we have many different solutions, and we need to find methods to solve that problem, definitely if we want to scale up to a very large number of studies. And that's where DARWIN EU has been, and that's why it has been initiated. So the vision of DARWIN EU is to establish and maintain a framework supporting better decision-making throughout the life cycle of the medicinal products with timely, valid and reliable evidence from real-world healthcare. And the objective is to establish and maintain a continually enlarging network of accessible observational data sources standardized to the Omicom data model, and to execute all steps of high-quality non-interventional studies within the network, and then to make these results also available to the European Medicines Agency and their committees. To do this, and especially at the scale that EMA wants to do this, we have to really generate or implement a paradigm shift. We cannot simply add more teams that run more studies in parallel. We have to be much smarter, and that's where, of course, everything that we've been working on in the community is stepping in. We need to standardize things. We need to standardize the data. We need to standardize the analytics. But we also need to standardize the reports. We need to agree on what we mean with the drug utilization study and not invent the wheel over and over again. So it's not simply scaling up traditional approaches. DARWIN EU is going to be, of course, a federated network where the data stays local, standardized to OMOP, and we bring the tools to the data. And that's especially important in Europe, where we have the GDPR regulation, all about privacy. And this is a very good solution that people like because of that. So the coordination center is going to be in the middle of this diagram. There's the EMA on one side asking for questions, and on the other side are the data partners, either directly interacting with the coordination center, but there's also some thoughts about data permit authorities in Europe, where, for example, a country is represented by a data permit authority and studies would run through that organization. This is part of the European health data space development as well, and it's not completely clear how this is going to work, but we'll definitely have experience with that at a later point in time. So setting up the DARWIN Coordination Center, as was already said earlier in the video, was done through a tender process where we were very, very happy that we were selected to set up the Coordination Center for the EMA. And that's not something we do alone. We work together with very good subcontractors that we have worked with before, and you probably are all familiar with definitely University of Oxford with Dani. Synapse may be new to you, but it's a management organization that we have worked with many, many times in large European projects, and they are fantastic. IQVIA, you all know, the Hive, very experienced in mapping data, and much more. And OHDSI, you all seen as well here, and also have a stand, who are building very interesting tools for us to use, like Arachne and other tools. But also are, of course, very involved in the vocabulary, and that's going to be extremely important for us. I'm supported by Dani and Katja, and I think the three of us together with this larger team are going to do a great job, I'm sure. The establishment is built around this kind of structure. So there's an executive board, the director and the deputy directors. They're supported by advisory boards that we are currently setting up, and we are selecting different types of experts to join these boards. And under that, under the director, are the 4 different pillars. One is development, where we are building all the tools, the analytical tools, but also things like templates for protocols, templates for reports, etc. Then there's operations, and operations is composed of 2 different parts. One is study operations. That part is going to be responsible for the execution of all the studies, setting up the teams, doing the dissemination. And the other part is network operation, which is all about standardizing the data to OMOP if it's not done already, or otherwise do quality control checks on the already mapped data. Then there's a technology pillar where we are working on adding additional tools in the ecosystem, but also supportive tools like a service desk. We're setting up collaborative environments to work in. We are working setting up a remote research environment, which is a secured environment where the data partners could upload their results to, and we can lock down that environment to actually execute the study, or to look at the results of the study, I should say. And of course, training platform, where we will be building on the great efforts that has been done in Eden, like the Eden Academy and other training courses that are available through OHDSI, because doing the change management in such an organization is also a very important part of our work. We have to train the people to use this new type of processes and results. And then there's a management section which deals with a lot of things like conflict of interest, which is of course very important. But also, I can tell you, we are producing a huge amount of deliverables. I think we've done a world record on the number of deliverables that we have written in the last couple of months. So thanks a lot for the management team. Now, what's EMA's role in this? Clearly, they are going to be the ones that are asking the questions coming from their other committees. But they're also highly involved in setting up an establishment and in the establishment phase of the Darwin EU Coordination Center, which is fantastic. So we work with a very nice team on the EMA side, where we have, in principle, twice weekly meetings where we discuss the progress and discuss all type of procedures and processes together with them to get alignment. And I really appreciate that interaction. So the data sources that we are going to include are the ones that you would expect. So the diverse set, nice geographic spread, and it's a growing list of data sources over time. I'll talk a bit more about it in a second. Oh, actually this one. So it's growing up to 40 databases in the first 4 years, but it may be extended further after that. The process that we have been developing, I will not go through the whole slide, but I just want to mention that it's very important that we go to a quality control mechanism with the data sources. So even though we ask them for their interest, we have meetings with them to align on what we actually expect from the data partners. We also go to a process where, beside them filling in like a questionnaire with all important questions on how often are you actually updating your data source and what are your governance procedures. We also ask them to run a package against their CDM that generates all kind of information on the trends of the data. Also, we check like the speed of queries on their infrastructure to make sure that we will not encounter these type of problems later on. So this tool that's built is based on the tool built in the Eden project that we use it there to onboard data partners in the large data network of Eden. We extended it a little bit here and now automatically generate an annex to the onboarding document, and that can be sent together with all the information to the EMA for approval, and after that we sign the contracts with the data partners and then have a contract per study, so a framework contract and a work order. The type of studies that we're running in Darwin are what they call off-the-shelf, so quick studies. You can think about incidence rate studies or drug utilization studies, more complex studies, safety, for example. And then there's the option for them to repeat those studies, so run them on a quarterly basis and get updated reports. And then finally, there is the idea of very complex studies. It's not completely defined yet what that's going to be, but it's assumed that that may require much more custom programming, while the other two should actually be based on standard analytics as much as possible. So the process is going to be EMA's requesting, has a question. We look at the feasibility of the study, which is a topic by itself, to think how you actually do a good feasibility study across a data network. And some of the tools that we have seen today, like the data diagnostics, for example, could really help with that. We then have protocols based on standard templates, so we're not going to write it from scratch all the time. It's been shared with the data partner together with the code. They run it. It's been reviewed by the Coordination Center, sent back to EMA, built in a aggregated format, like the graphs across multiple databases. And they review it and then make their regulatory decision making. Now, the number of studies is really ambitious, so it's growing very fast. So we're now in the first phase of the project, year 1, I think month 7 or so. This year we only have to run 4 studies. But it's growing fast, so next year it's already 16 studies, and it's going up and up and up to almost 145 studies a year. So that is a huge number of studies. That's not possible if you would need all kind of teams to run that. You need to be smarter, and we are investing a lot of effort in figuring out how to do that and how to scale up. Of course, that's done through standardized analytics, as we all know. We just need to change the drug of interest and not build a whole package again to run a drug utilization study. It's a very interesting thing to work on, I think, at the moment, because we have to align on what we mean with all these things. What is a drug utilization study? What is the report that we need to generate? And alignment is being sought now with EMA. Currently, we're working on these type of analytical pipelines or use them from OHDSI. Population-level disease epidemiology, patient-level disease epidemiology, population-level drug utilization, and patient-level drug utilization. And you see some examples of the studies that may fall under these categories on the right. More complex studies are risk minimization effectiveness, new user active comparators studies, where, of course, the cohort method and other nice tools from OHDSI would be used. And self-controlled case series is another topic that's on the list now. So where are we? So we are now in month 6. We've done a lot of preparatory work, also started to build some new pipelines. The processes are all in place. We are actually onboarding data partners already. 10 data partners have been selected by EMA, and the first are actually already signed up and we have contracts with, which is great. And other tools are being developed in the development pillar, and a lot of templates and work there. Operations, we have been requested 3 studies, and these studies are, of course, drive our development, characterization study, drug utilization study. And on technology side, there's a lot of progress, and I'm really looking forward to share some of that also in upcoming OHDSI Symposia. And finally, yeah, we are also moving to phase 2. So this is a contract that's every year has to be extended, and this is now also being approved. So I'm very happy that we are able to continue, of course, and deliver these studies at a large scale to the European Medicines Agency. Thank you very much.
So that was the conclusion of our first session, which focused on envisioning of OHDSI Global and the EU. I think it's a wonderful opportunity to see not only where we are as a region, but how we can fit into the global community of OHDSI and learn from what other regions have also done as they initiate standardization and change.